Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. Welcome back to episode 11 of the Children's Book Author Podcast with me, Eleanor Page, your host and fellow children's book author. Today I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Ben Hendry, who, no, is not a children's book author, but a professional drummer. What has that got to do with children's books, you may ask? Well, probably nothing, but he is on a creative journey. And what I loved about talking with Ben is that he is a full-time professional drummer and also a drumming teacher. And he tells this one story, which is honestly worth gold. I lie in bed so many mornings and think of this exact conversation that I had with Ben about how when he was younger, he got on a train. I don't want to ruin the story, but I am telling you a bit of it. And somebody in this story tried to discourage him from being a full-time drummer, or not discourage him, but at least say to him, hey, you might not end up being one. I feel like as a creative, that's all I was ever told as a child. For me, I wanted to be an actor when I was young, and everyone said to me all the time, oh, well, yes, sure, you might want to be one, but will you? It's really hard. You should pick a backup career. And so I did. I studied law and psychology. So, I sound pretty smart. You might not think that when you meet me in person, but I am genuinely smart. I am. Anyhow, ended up becoming a psychologist for a lot of years, but that creative part of me was always there. And then when I eventually started writing children's books, I still had people say to me, oh, what a lovely little side project thing, as though, it's not really a thing. And I actually still get this now that I write. I actually retired myself from psychology and I'm full-time writing children's books. They're like, oh, but you don't make a living doing that, do you? And it's like, yes, actually, I do. Talking to Ben, really, we talk about a lot of things creative, which you're going to love as a creative yourself. But on top of that, the real takeaway for me was it's okay to put it all on the line. You're allowed to say, I ain't doing nothing else but this, and I'm going to stick to it until I make it. It's not my interview, but that's my greatest advice to you. And you don't have to take it because it may not suit you. But over the years, what I noticed, even as a independent, running my own business counselor, and I did natural healing as well for 20 years, most people gave up. And there were times on the road where I didn't make any money, especially in the first few years. And writing children's books was no different. I didn't make hardly any money in the first initial years. And a lot of people quit. A lot of people stop. And I think it's okay to, especially if you really need money, 100%. Not saying don't do that. Or maybe you're going to keep your, other job while you're doing it, which is what I did, right? But ultimately, at some point, when you stay with something long enough, when you genuinely put it all on the line, I do believe you make it. Now, making it looks different to different people. Like Ben isn't like some world famous drummer, or maybe he is. I don't know, because I don't really circle in the drumming world. So my apologies, Ben. If you are really a world famous drummer, amazing. But nonetheless, he makes a wonderful living. He does what he loves. It's who he is. It's amazing. And I want to be like that as a children's book author. I want it to be everything that I am and do Yes, I do other things and I am lots of other things, but nonetheless, I want to put it all on the line. And I hope that after listening to this interview, you do too. Enjoy the show. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now. Welcome back to the show. Today I have my first musician. You know, I've been hunting for one, and I have Ben Hendry, who is a drummer, a music director, teacher, and collaborator with an interest in performance theory and stagecraft for jazz musicians. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Hello, nice to be here.
So, oh my God, that is so many things that you do. And I want to unpack a little of each of them in the time that we have. But let's go back to the very beginning. How did you get to live such an amazing creative life? Where did it all begin for you?
Well, the very first thing that I did was, the story that my mum tells anyway, is as soon as I could speak, I started asking for a drum set. And by the time I was 5 years old, I got the drums and just a little children's setup. And I used to drag that out into the lounge room on Saturday mornings and play along with video hits.
Love it.
Driving everyone in the house crazy, but I was having a great time.
So it was in you from really young, like this was just you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my great grandfather was a percussionist, and he became quite famous. Excuse me. He worked with Charlie Chaplin and played at the Albert Hall and stuff in London and did all this sort of stuff. So my mum again and my dad both have commented on that, saying it must be in your genes somewhere. You know, my mum's a pianist, and so there's always music around as a family. In the family, it was a pretty musical upbringing, and I took to it. I liked practicing. It was fun, therapeutic. I wasn't such a great student at school as I have dyslexia, which sort of slows my reading down a bit. And back in the day, that was widely misunderstood, and I was just labelled a troublemaker. And I've since learned that that's quite a common story amongst creatives. And so I've gravitated towards the thing that I was good at, and the thing that I was good at was the drums. So
when did you leave school and just straight off go into drumming?
Yeah, I mean, much to the disgust of my father. He was really, really adamant that I stayed at school and got my education, but that didn't really work out. I left school in year 11, and just was pursuing a life as a musician. About 6 or 7 years after that, I went and started studying again. I got into TAFE and did my diploma, and then I toured for a couple of years around Europe after that. I lived in London and tried to carve a scene out for myself there. That was a really interesting time. But then got back to Melbourne and got into the VCA and did my 3 years of my bachelor's there, and that was a hugely formative time for me. Made a lot of connections, and a big part of what we do in university as musicians is I'm sure it's similar in the other arts too, but that's where the core of our sort of community lies. Like, I'm still playing with the people that I went to college with. That seems to be the way it works. And I whilst the studying part was challenging and difficult, and obviously there's things in every course that you might do like that aren't that relevant to you. The thing that I'm most grateful for is still having that lovely sort of conglomerate of musicians that still employ me, and I still employ them. Still love working with them. So yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love that in your titles, let's call it that you use the term collaborator. Like, I've never seen that before, but that really jumped at me. I felt there was some really important aspect to that, because you're not, well, I suppose you can be a drummer on your own, but ultimately a drummer has a lot more fun, right? And not just drumming, but all the other things you do, they're all about collaborating.
Yes. I really, really love the collaboration process. That's my favourite way to produce work. I mean, I'm a session musician, so you can put a piece of sheet music in front of me and I'll play it. Or you can say, I want you to play the drums like this, and I'll do that. That's what my training is. But the most fulfilling thing for me to do is to be in a room with good musicians or good artists, whether they be dancers or circus performers or whatever, and say, okay, well, let's make something up together. And that allows me to be myself. And yeah, that's super exciting and fulfilling.
I had two things I want to ask about that you just said in there. The first was that, we can stick any piece of music in front of you and you can play it. Like, how did you get so good to be able to do that? Is that just the courses and the practice? How many years did it take? Like, I want to talk to you about that part.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of students, like people beginning to play the drums, don't see the value in reading music. And I'm definitely one of them. I came to sort of realise that reading was going to be an important part of the of how I was going to get work. I got there quite late, so because I just want to hit the drums, man. I just want to play. I don't care about all this technical stuff and reading and whatnot. I was just really excited to be hitting things rather than reading things. But the actual reading of drum music it's not really that complicated to understand as a concept. There's a whole bunch of shapes you've got to learn, basically, and once those shapes are, you build up a neural pathway between seeing a shape and playing that shape. It all starts flowing pretty quick. Like a lot of the younger students that I have seem to be able to pick that up really, really quickly, even beyond their ability to play. They can read and understand what's happening on the page. It's unusual. It's an unusual thing that happens that there's so many students are adverse to doing it, because it's actually really not that big a deal. You can learn to do it in a few months.
Well, I didn't realise that people were adverse to doing that. I thought that was part of it. But you're saying some people just, I guess it's a bit like an artist who just wants to kind of draw, but doesn't learn the theory of like you said, shapes. Like you need to learn shape before you can really make your drawing even better. It's the same in drums.
Yeah, absolutely it is, yeah. And the beauty of being able to read relatively well, like I'm not the world's greatest sight reader, but it comes up quite often, so I do it often. The beauty of being able to do it is that I can pick up any book on drums and get something out of it immediately, rather than needing to figure out what it's trying to tell me. It's all black and white dots on the page. You can play it and go, oh yeah, I know how that goes now. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy amazing. So, like, how many years did it take you to get to a level where you're kind of like got that confidence of, I can do any gig, any performance?
Well, I wouldn't say that I can do any performance.
Yeah.
There's definitely limits. But well, it is a bit of a shock the first time you sit down in a studio and you think you've been booked to play, and they're gonna play the music for me, and then I'll do my take. That's a very common way for it to happen. Nowadays, they send you they'll send you a file to listen to before you get to the studio at all, so you can prepare. But so the shock being, you've gone into the studio expecting some sort of similar thing like that to happen, and then there's this page in front of you, and being paid to be there as a professional musician, you've got to get it right in the first or second go. And it's like, well, that's a pretty good incentive to learn to read a bit better.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially, as I was saying, like it's actually not that difficult a thing to get your head around and learn to do. I mean, some years of practice you'll get better, but it'll become more natural. But I think dedicated like time every day for a few months, and you'll definitely have a pretty good grasp on how it all goes. Yeah.
The second thing you said earlier that I want to talk more about, because it popped in my ear as you said it, was when you're performing with other people, and you said like you have like the freedom. I'm probably misspeaking it, but you have the freedom to be yourself. Like I felt your pitch went up almost as you said it, like a freedom. Yeah. So how does that happen? Is that about feeling comfortable to be who you are because you're with a whole group of others who are being who they are? Like, what's actually happening?
Yeah, that's a really complicated topic because just to give you an example, at the moment, there's I'm playing a lot of music that's from the 1940s, like the 30s and 40s, so like New Orleans, Dixieland, and trad jazz stuff, you know. And I really love this music. My dad listened to it. I'm well acquainted with the style. As you're learning a style of music, like something specific like that, there's a set of rules to follow. That you know, all the other musicians that you're playing with, if they know the style well, they'll be following those rules and understand what the rules are at the drum set too, you know. And so if I step outside of that set of rules, then, you know, you're going to raise some eyebrows and people are maybe not book you for the next concert and things like this. But the thing that I've been finding interesting lately about it is like, well, I've studied the music. I've got a degree in it. I've done a lot of work on being able to play that style. And the thing that I find exciting about that style is the fact that they're being themselves and they're being creative. Back in the 40s, listening to those recordings, they're being creative. They're like, some of it's almost, I loosely say the word punk. They're being like aggressively playing that music with all their hearts and not really, it's not like the music that came before it, which would have been like brass band stuff and much more conservative. It came from largely from a point of rebellion and expressing sorrows and things like this. So these guys were being expressive and expressing themselves and making it up, and that's what was exciting about it. When I see drummers and musicians around Melbourne, not just drummers, but going to see musicians around Melbourne playing in that style, the ones that stand out to me and the ones that are popular inside the scene are the guys that know the style really well, but they express themselves and they break the rules because they have license to do that because they've learnt the style, but also they have a creative expression that they want to let out. So it's a difficult balance to find. Whereas, I mean, like my experience in music is quite broad. I've played in many different styles in many different settings, and so my influences are going to all be there when I play and I'm being by myself. Like when I'm expressing myself, all those influences are going to come out in some way. One would hope. And so to be playing a very specific style of music, I can either, like I've been saying to myself lately, I'm not playing history. I'm making it. Like I don't want to play like textbook style 1940s. That guy played like this, and I'm going to do it exactly like that. It's good to go through that process of learning what it is, but then stepping beyond that and being yourself within, like pushing out the parameters of the box, I suppose, is what I'm talking about. And so you are going to raise eyebrows doing that, and people are going to go, "That doesn't sound like New Orleans." You know, what are you doing? But then you sort of go, well, the thing that you liked about that those guys was they weren't playing textbook stuff. They were making it up, and that was exciting to them, and that's what made them excited. That's what makes them exciting. That's what I'm going for.
That's magic, that sentence. I love that. I'm not going to play history. I'm going to make history. That is so good. And you explained that so well. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking that's, you know, that same advice, you just said it brilliantly, but that same advice is given in every other field of artistic endeavour, that it's, you got to learn the rules before you break them. But I love the way you put it, that if you go back in time, they weren't even following rules to begin with to some. I mean, they probably were, but they were such rule breakers. That's what made it so great. But now, you know, we're almost a little bit, maybe we're not, maybe I'm making this up, a little bit skewed to following those rules, but you've got to keep in mind you want to still break them.
Absolutely.
And that would take, I think, a lot of really knowing yourself, having enough experience in that, whatever that genre of your creativity is, in your case, drumming, and then still being brave enough to do it, because like you said, some people might ridicule that. Like, do you ever get, I don't know, do you get reviewed in the music industry? Do you have people go like, he was a terrible drummer, or does that not happen? How does it work in the music industry?
Well, there are like I'm remembering a review that came out about a friend's album. This is it came out in The Age, and this is this fantastic album came out. Beautiful musicians. They did their launch at the what used to be called Bennett's Lane in the city. And this reviewer comes along and just gives them this terribly scathing review about how much they didn't like the music and all that sort of stuff. And everyone was upset, and the jazz community was upset because how dare they sort of take down this amazing album with these great musicians on it. And it turns out that the lady was that came to review it, she wasn't a musician, she was a ballet dancer, and she didn't like jazz. So, you know, like the reviewing thing, it's like, well, when you're reading reviews, it's worthwhile trying to find out who's written it, because sometimes they might not like the job they've gotten that night. They've been paid to go and see a gig. They didn't choose it. They didn't really like it. It's like, well, it's not saying the music's bad. It's just saying they didn't like it. But as it comes across in a review, it's like, you know, painful. Yeah,
exactly. Do you have trusted peers that you kind of ask their opinion, like of, you know, how do you think that is? How can I improve? Where is it at? Or are you past that now? Or do you ever get past that?
No, well, one would hope not. Like I've had a couple of times. I was just talking about this the other day. There's a drummer I really love from New York called Jim Black, and it's just happened to me a couple of times with different artists that have been traveling through Australia, and I've got in contact with them and said, I'd love to have a lesson with you, because they're a huge influence on me. And they've done their due diligence and asked around to make sure I'm not some weirdo. And so I say, I speak to these, I know the guys you're playing with, so speak to them about, you know, I'm not going to be a stalker or anything. And they've both these guys have come back to me, and I was talking about Jim Black. He came back to me and said, look, it doesn't sound like you're a student, so I can't give you a lesson. And I'm like, I hope I'm a student for the rest of my life. Like, I'm very far from knowing everything. There's still so much to learn. But yeah, it can be challenging to get honest information from your peers. And what I've been realizing lately, as now that I'm in my mid-40s now, and I'm working with a lot of younger guys as well as people in my age group and older, I'm noticing that it doesn't go down so well when I ask advice from the less experienced musicians. Like if I'm talking about like something stylistic, for example, and what albums you listen to, so I can get on the same page when we're playing this style. You know, I ask those sorts of questions a lot, and I've noticed it doesn't go down so well with the less experienced musicians who are now looking at me to be the mentor rather than, you know, them mentoring me. You know, I think I don't feel good about that, because I think we should all be sharing information and talking about how we can all improve the ensembles that we're playing in. But it's a good realization to make, and so I'm sort of sticking with long-term friends, people that I've been around a lot. They'll always sort of point me in the direction with some generosity, and also the older musicians that have got way more experience than me. If you can get them talking, and usually a couple of beers will do that, you can actually get some gold information from them. And it's often seen in the scene that I'm working in, that I'm talking mostly about the jazz scene at the moment. It seems to be like an omission. I mean, it could just be my own insecurities, but it seems like an omission of insecurity. Like I don't know what I'm doing if I'm asking these sorts of questions, like which Louis Armstrong's albums should I listen to get the drumming right? You know, because there's so many Louis Armstrong albums, and it's going to take a long time to wade through it all, because there's good and bad stuff there. And like, which ones do you listen to? Because I want to check that stuff out. And people are like, oh, you don't even know which albums to listen to. You know, I'm like, well, I can't listen to everything in the world, you know, like it's it can be tricky.
Oh, that's so interesting, isn't it? Like, so even like how people perceive you,
Mm.
they've kind of almost put you at a certain level, and then they're judging that in relation to where they're at. So you know that really good drummer in the US was like, well, you're not a student, isn't that's so funny? Whereas you're like,
Really
yeah,
Yeah.
I am a student. I'm a student forever. Like, and but then your students think, oh, you know, like he's asking me, so
Mm.
they feel that intimidation. It's probably just natural. I think it's human, the human in each of us, and probably in the music industry, it's just maybe like you said in jazz, it's I don't know the unspoken rules
Yeah.
of your hierarchy or something. I don't know. Yeah, that's really fascinating experience.
I mean, people as a drummer, like the drummer's role in the group is like needs to be like if I take what happens musically, a drummer needs to keep solid time and in some ways support and direct the dynamics of the group, and those things need to be very reliable. And so when you might and so that needs to come through in your personality, for example. You know, like when your social demeanor needs to be somebody that's solid, reliable, you can trust that they're going to be there for you, you know. So if a soloist wants to go off on a crazy wild tangent and be really bombastic and then get silent all of a sudden, or near silence all of a sudden, they need to trust that you're going to be there for them and that you're listening, and that comes through in my relationships with people as well. Like I try and foster those sorts of behaviors in my social interactions, so they get the impression that I'm somebody that's listening and I'm somebody that's going to be there for you, and that leads to more work, leads to better musical experiences. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That is a great insight. That's like, there's a bit of gold right there. I mean, everything you've said is gold, but that one's like super shiny gold. And that sense that you as a person, well, like, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, that's a far cry from that kid back at school that the teachers thought was very unreliable. There you go, eh? So definitely not an indicator. But amazing that you've recognised that, in essence, what I'm hearing is you've got almost a leadership role as the drummer.
Well, there's that's I think that's a bit much.
Did I go too far? Was it
The
no,
leadership role, I'm definitely a supportive role. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
in the supportive role. Yeah. So there's been a lot written about it. The different personality profiles
Okay.
of different musicians, like a trumpet player will the sort of personalities that are attracted to different instruments, for example.
Right.
And so
Right.
the sort of personality that's attracted to the trumpet is somebody that likes to be up the front and the loudest in the band, and you know, and calling the tunes, and you know, making that sort of stuff happen. You don't often see an introverted trumpet player
Right.
because they do exist. There's obviously, you know, exceptions to every rule, but if you're looking stereotypically, a lot of trumpet players are going to be a loud voice, a big personality, whereas a drummer is you know, I can't remember the text, I'm afraid, but that this comes from, but a drummer is often seen as a mediator in the band. So we're trying to get everyone to be friends and come together and you know, work as a team, that sort of stuff. So I'm definitely in
The
a supportive
glue.
role.
The glue.
The glue.
Who would you say is the leader then? Could you call out someone like a particular musical instrument as the leader, or not really? Are you
Well,
also
no,
equal? Kind of, have you all got a particular role?
well, I have my own band doing 1960s soul jazz sort of covers. It's a piano trio, but there's a fourth member as a percussionist, and I wrote all the arrangements and gave the music to my musicians, the piano, upright bass, and percussionist. And then after the first couple of gigs we did, I said to the piano player, would you mind taking over the directing role? Because when we're coming in and out, like we're going through different sections of the pieces, and there's lots of room to improvise and move around. And I just felt that, I mean, I could call the next section in at the end of an improvisation. But the pianist is the soloist in the group, so he knows when he wants to finish and move on better than I do. So I stepped aside from that role of being the baton holder and saying now. I gave that role to him. So I could do it, and there are drummers that are really good at doing that. I do it quite well. I've done it in a lot of groups, but in that particular ensemble, it's like I felt it a better choice for him to take that leadership role. So yeah, it really depends. I mean, who's got the personality and aptitude for it, and what instrument they played. It doesn't necessarily dictate that. And there's plenty of great examples of band leaders that have been drummers, and they've been directing the band as well as organising the business and doing the whole, like being the leader. But so I think, in short, it's really the person that's willing to put in the effort to run the business is often the one that wants to have, is likely going to want to have the creative drive as well. As the business stuff is usually the hard bit for us musos that don't really like doing it much. So if you've got the passion for the project that is big enough for you to actually want to do the business stuff too, then you deserve the right to sort of go, yep, I know how I want this song to go, and you guys are going to play it like this.
Yeah. I'm like, the psychologist in me is like lights go off in my brain when you talk about, the different personalities and that are drawn to different instruments and even, who wants to be in that kind of directing role in different times on different music pieces. It's so fascinating. I never really thought about that. I'd love to know if there's a study on what sort of personalities go into different creative pursuits based on, I don't know, who they are as people, but that's so fascinating.
I heard a really interesting one some while ago. It was about the left and right brain, and is in relationship to study. So it's the right brain that's the creative side, isn't it? And then the left brain,
I believe so. Yeah.
So often, like, an arts student will go into college in their first year with the right brain. Dominant right brain, so creative thinking, wanting to express themselves through some medium, free from the boundaries of restrictions of the rules and the boxes that we put on society and all that sort of stuff. And then when we come out for 3 or 4 years later, the students often then become more dominant left brain, and because we spend 4 years or 3 years studying, and something a lot of people do longer than that too. In music school or in art school, so much of our time is spent analysing and criticising the work of others so we can learn from it. So if you spend 3 years doing anything, you're going to get, it's going to change the way your brain works. And so the thing that I find exciting about it, though, is there are some musicians, you can tell the ones that get stuck in the left brain, and that they become analytical players, and that's suitable for a lot of styles of music too. But as an expressive form such as jazz and improvised music, that left brain stuff can hinder your sense of play because you're analysing your own notes, for example. So the great musicians that I've noticed, or the people that I really admire and love seeing around Melbourne and the world, you can see that they've got the knowledge, but they've figured out a way of transcending that left brain and gone back to the playful right brain and expressive right brain. Yeah.
Well, there's the title, it's creative genius at play. That's why that play had to be in there.
Yeah, the play thing, that's a big one.
It's big. Yeah, it's big. But how do you ensure that? Like, is it almost like you've got to be a bit of that observer self, like you would be in meditation or something, where you're, do you observe yourself when you're playing? Are you kind of so in it that you're lost to it? And what happens?
Yeah, on a good day. Yeah, absolutely. There's the state of flow that a lot of people associate with the arts, and that we as artists have the luxury of exploring very often. And I feel like when that analytical left brain comes in, which mine still kicks in quite often, I'm sure it's something that happens to a lot of people, but when that's happening and I'm thinking about it and I'm trying to do this and I'm trying to do that and I want to make this work, it's I'll often get to a gig a lot more get to the end of the gig or the session or whatever I'm doing a lot more exhausted than I would have been, rather than if I come off the stage having spent quite a lot of time in a state of flow. I would come off the stage feeling really good about myself and, having had a lot of fun. And I think that having that playful and fun state of flow that's there, and time disappears and all that sort of stuff, that the audience reads that. The audience, they might not be able to put their finger on it and say and break it down and say this is what is happening on stage right now, but it's I've seen it happen hundreds of times. Like, you can really tell what when the audience is responding, it's usually because the people on stage are having a good time. I've had the opportunity to play in some shows which have done long seasons. Like I did a couple of years ago. I was in Berlin for 6 months and we played 8 shows a week. And when you get to do that, which is it's a different kind of fun, because the music gets, some people might say it gets stale, but if you're with the right ensemble, the music gets deeper. We just kept on finding these beautiful little juicy things to tweak, and more and more detail kept happening. It was a really great work environment for me. But you'd see that sometimes the bass player wouldn't be in the best mood. The audience would be responding differently than they did the night before. And so it's kind of, I'm not sure that it can be peer reviewed and studied and all that sort of stuff. Or maybe it has, but I'm sure that having the state of flow in place, when if you can find it, or train yourself to find it in some way, then that's going to translate to the audience really beautifully too.
Is that like where your interest in, like, that performance theory and that stagecraft comes from? Like, you're really interested in how those dynamics, like how to, I don't want to say master them, but kind of like somewhat of that formula, like some of the things that you're talking about here?
Yeah, look, the performance theory stuff, I started being exposed to this stuff when I was working with a singer called cabaret performer at the time called Eddie Perfect, and I went into a rehearsal. We were doing shows at the comedy festival, and he had a director. It was the first time I'd worked with a theatrical director, and he was giving me advice on how I should play the drums, which was sort of making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I don't like being, who's this guy telling me how to play the drums? Is he even a musician? But what they were trying to do is service the show as an entire piece, rather than just what I was doing the drums or what just Eddie was doing with his voice. He was looking at the big picture, which from the drum chair is kind of hard to do. In the middle of playing stuff and trying to make the music work, looking at the big picture is going to be challenging. So having an outside eye for the first time was confronting, but it was also very exciting. And once I got over my initial response, it was really, really great. I learned a lot from it. And so I did a lot of shows with him. And then that led to other work in that world, in the comedy and cabaret scene, and then music theatre. And when I came back to playing with my people in Melbourne and playing jazz in these small ensembles, and just going out to see my friends play, I just noticed a lot of these little details that weren't there in terms of how to address the stage and how to address the audience. Just the simplest thing, like finding your light, like the singer getting into a venue, there's lights up, but there's no one focusing them. So you go and stand underneath the light, then that's where you put your microphone. That's where you're going to stand and sing, And a lot of, like, seems common sense, but so often you go and see a jazz gig and that doesn't happen. And that made me realize that I never got told any of this when I was at college or at TAFE or in my drum lessons or anywhere. No one has trained me to be a stage performer, a stage artist. They've just been training me to play the music. And so I'm seeing all these holes everywhere in that performance art, that it happens on stage, whether you pay attention to it as an artist or not, it's still happening. The audience still knows on some level that there's these, three main aspects of being on stage. There's the oral, the stuff that we're hearing, there's the visual, and then there's the context and concept. And those three things are there, whether the artist is paying attention to them and giving detail to them. They're still there for an audience regardless. And if the jazz musician isn't doing one of those things very well, just one of those three things is out of whack, then it doesn't go away. It just isn't a very good performance, unfortunately. So it led me to sort of thinking more and more about this performance theory stuff and how I can express these ideas to my jazz musician fraternity. And I found a lot of pushback. A lot of people don't like talking about theatre. A lot of jazz musicians won't. They just think that you're talking about bells and whistles and faking it and like smiling and mugging the camera and like trying to win an audience with cheap tricks rather than just being like, they should just like the music. They'll always say they should just like the music. It's like, yeah, that other stuff doesn't go away though. It doesn't cease to exist because you're not paying attention to it. You're just doing that part of it badly, It's kind of hard to get it across. I think it's a language thing more than anything else though. Like, I think I need to work on how I'm expressing those ideas in a more agreeable vocabulary to my jazz musician friends.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it, that they've got pushback? But I hear what you're saying. Yeah. They're like, no, the music should speak for itself. But it's a whole different creative thing, isn't it? Like I think the term for it is, and I could be completely saying this wrong, but stagemanship. I'm actually interviewing someone next week who was a professional magician, and I will be interviewing him next week. But actually, I remember he said the story that when he was often booked, he was actually the best detailed performer. Like, he was really good at detailed magic and amazing magician. But he used to see this other guy that used to get all the gigs. And the other guy that got all the gigs wasn't a very good magician. And it would really irk him. But then one time he sort of let his ego sort of step back, and he just observed, and he realized that this other magician had better stagemanship than he did. Yeah. And so that's when he kind of went, you know what, I might be the best magician in the world, but I need to work on and I feel like that's sort of a little bit what you're referring to, that there's
absolutely,
all those elements that are important, because the audience doesn't know they're doing it, but all those things are going in perceptually.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's in this jazz community where like the music is at the top of the tree in terms of those three elements that I discussed earlier. And it shouldn't be any other way. The music is really, really hard to play, and particularly getting an ensemble to function in that way is a huge challenge. Years and years of training and work and experience to be done to make it happen well. So that is primarily the focus. But the other stuff, the stagemanship, stagecraft, and things like that, it doesn't need to be. You don't need to assume a character like that, some larger than life character. You don't need to put on a theatrical performance, but there's a way of being on stage that invites an audience to be there with you and to be welcomed into the performance, which can be endearing, or it can be dark, or it can be intense, or it can be joyful and funny, whatever it is that's coming out of you, that you're expressing through the music, needs to be, that an audience needs to be welcomed into that, because some of this music can be challenging to listen to start with. And if you're being challenging to watch on stage too, you're really asking people to walk out the door, aren't you? And then everyone gets upset and goes, "Oh, but no one likes my music." And like, you weren't asking the audience to listen. You were pretending like you didn't care whether they were there or not.
Right.
Doesn't matter how good you play.
Right. I love that you say welcome them in. You're right. Yeah, it's like you've got to like offer them. It's almost like, I don't know if you've ever heard of neuro-linguistic programming. It's one of the techniques in that is you have to pace people before you can lead them. So, a lot of people are like, no, I communicate the way that I communicate.
Right.
I'm not going to change the way that I, communicate to people. But actually in neuro-linguistic programming, it says that actually you sort of have to like be like the person a little bit, and then you can lead them to your style, to that place. That's what I'm almost somewhat hearing you say. Different, but kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating that the parallels that you can draw, isn't it, between psychology and performance and everything else in the world. It's great.
So let's talk a little bit about teaching, because you are a drum teacher.
I can teach drums.
Yeah, you teach drums. Tell me, what's that like? Like, does that help you become better? Does it just access a different part of your creativity to now have to teach the things that you know?
Yeah.
How is that process?
I've been thinking a lot about it. I haven't been teaching regularly for quite a while. I've been on tour so much the last decade, like before the world collapsed. I was a touring guy.
Good that you got it in, though, hey?
I'm so very, very happy that I've got experience teaching. When I'm saying teaching here, I'm talking about having a relationship with a student for a long period of time, like for months or years, rather than going in and doing a workshop or a masterclass. But I feel like they're kind of different fields. So developing a relationship with the student is a really fantastic and rewarding thing to do. Even when you have a student that is not necessarily going to turn out to be a professional musician, my focus at that point becomes, when I realise that, it becomes pretty obvious in the first few lessons that, whether they've got the natural ability or whether they've got the interest and excitement for it, or whether it's just something that their mum says that they have to do. They're overwhelmed with so many other things, and this is at the bottom of their list. They're doing taekwondo and soccer and blah, blah, blah. You sort of go on. It's likely this person might not turn out to be a professional musician. It's a rare figure, rare statistic of people that end up going all the way through it. So we end up, my focus being at that point is I would like this student to have an understanding of music to the point which that deepens their appreciation of it. So they can understand how the drums work, and they can listen to a track and I know what the drums are doing and how to do that. And isn't it great what they're doing? Because I know it's hard and takes a lot of training, and there's a lot of appreciation that's involved in knowing how hard it is to do something. The general public often think musicians just do it for fun, and it's really easy once you know how.
It does look easy, but actually it doesn't when you look more closely, because there's so much variation of how that's being worked out. And I'm really impressed by the left-right brain integration going on, that must be happening for drummers.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I can get a student to develop an understanding and therefore an appreciation for music, not just the drums. So I'll listen to a lot of music in my lessons and stuff, and talk about how that music makes them feel. It's something that never happened when I was getting drum lessons, but something that I wish had happened, because so often my students will go, I don't know, like, what do you mean? Well, did it make you happy? Or you said you didn't like that one. Why? What was it that you didn't like? Oh, I just didn't like the way it made me feel. And I was like, well, how did you feel? It's like asking these kids to the students, I should say, to actually respond to, like, give me an explanation for their physical and emotional response to a piece of music. It's like they're going to keep doing that for the rest of their lives, and hopefully appreciate that skill, because a lot of people don't know why they like certain things. It's just something that they've got in their, like, that's something they grew up listening to. A lot of people, for example, like, listen to AC/DC from when they're a teenager and still listen to AC/DC, the band, as an adult, and there's totally nothing wrong with that, and it's great music. But you ask them what it is that they like about it, and they have no articulation to express it. That's just what I listen to.
That's so
So
true. That's so true. Even me, as you're talking, I'm imagining I'm your student, and I'm like, oh, how does it make me feel? I don't know.
yeah,
I need to think about that now when I listen. I listen
yeah.
to music. Yeah, and it's funny. Like students would be thinking, "Feel? What's that got to do with anything?" But it's central, isn't it?
So if you're connecting with that stuff, then you can express it. You know, if you're playing a piece of music and that piece of music makes you feel a certain way, all the more you're expressing that feeling through your body into the instrument and out into the audience. You know,
Does it
there's
make the difference between like students who kind of play really technically versus the ones that, like you say, their whole body and emotion moves into the instrument?
yeah, absolutely, it does. There's a lot of left brain musicians out there that are really amazing technicians on their instrument, but they're not very inspiring to watch because they're they're technicians. They're operating the instrument rather than playing it. You know.
Wow, gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna like do something musical later today and see if I'm not actually very musical. The rest of my family is, but I do believe everybody's musical. Just like everybody's an artist and everybody's a writer and everybody, it's in all of us, isn't it? Um, do you like see, and this is like probably a bit of a weird question, but do you see like a little spark in some of those students where you think, oh yeah, this one could go on to really do this,
Yeah,
maybe professionally, but even if not professionally, to do it as a like lifelong hobby. Do you see that? Like, is it different from the ones that don't really give it value?
yeah, definitely. The spark is so fun to be around when you have a young student come in. Like I have an 8-year-old girl come in once a week, and she on her first lesson she brought in a piece by Sly and the Family Stone. It's like a 1970s funk band, and she played this like she just told me about it, and I pulled it up on my phone on Spotify to listen to it together. And I was like, man, you're a funky little thing, you are, Like, and she was just so excited that I could get it on my phone and we could start playing it today. It was her first lesson. It's like, I can teach you how to do some of that now. Like, what? Really?
Wow.
This is the best, Like, it's such a joy. But then there's the other ones that say, I don't know, I don't listen to music. And I was like, what does Mum listen to? And we start listening to ABBA or something like that. And I'm not saying ABBA's bad or anything. They're actually quite fantastic, but you can tell that an 8 or 9-year-old kid is not choosing to listen to ABBA is what the point that I'm trying to make. It's like, but they don't know what else to tell me. It's like, well, it'd be kind of like being on a football team and not liking it when you get to kick the ball. Because it's like, you kind of got to like kicking the ball if you want to be in the football team, right? So if you want to play music, and drums is a musical instrument, you kind of got to like listening to music too, So I'm often finding myself encouraging more listening.
That's awesome. Yeah, encouraging the listening in order to
Yeah,
get to the better playing. Again, it's similar advice. They say if you want to be a writer, you should be reading a lot.
yeah,
Yeah. If you want to be an artist, you should be looking at a lot of art. Otherwise, what are you doing?
yeah.
It's that same sort of thing. So, what would you say to if you could go back in time and meet young Ben, who's just sort of starting out in drumming? What would you say as advice?
Um, I've got a bit of a backstory for that. I had when I was 13, 14, I started working with some musicians that were much older than me in bars and playing blues gigs and stuff, which was hugely exciting as a 13-year-old
So exciting!
boy.
Wow, what
Yeah,
a
yeah.
gig to start with.
And so that led to a recording session, and so it was my first recording session, and I just thought, I've made it. Like, like I'm already doing it, like I'm living the dream. I'm doing this recording session, and now I'm famous, And so I was so excited, went into the drum shop, I traveled to the city. I was living in Mornington, and I traveled up to the city, went to the drum shop and wanted to buy a new set of skins for my drums so they sounded as nice as they could on this recording. And this guy in the drum shop, I was like, oh, I'm doing a recording, I'm going to be famous, blah, 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 to this guy in the drum shop. And he just shut me down. He just said, man, you're not going to make any money from this. Don't get your hopes up here. Like, and he really, really sort of, cut me down horribly. And I'm sure he was with good intentions, but, he was a musician that things hadn't worked out for, that had landed in working in a retail shop, and so he was being compassionate and trying to help me. But at the same time, I was really upset about it. And on the train ride home, I told myself, and this is this 13-year-old boy telling myself, I'm not going to be one of those guys. If I ever shut a young man down or young musician down for getting excited about what their next project is, at that point, I'm going to quit music, because I don't want to be the jaded old guy that's working in the drum shop and telling kids that they're never going to make it anywhere. Like, it was just horrible. I've come, and particularly as a young man, because I was working more and more professionally after that, that came up quite a lot. Like, these older musicians would be saying, oh, you should really do something else as well. You shouldn't just put all your eggs in the musician's basket, because I was like, well, who are you to tell me this? Like, why would you be discouraging me? Like, other than it hasn't worked out for them, so it probably won't work out for you too. I just think that's no way to allow a person or an artist to dream, is it? You've got to put it all on the line.
That's a terrific story. I love that you were so smart at that age that you were like, hold on a minute. That's really, like, I don't want to say intelligent. I want to say emotionally intelligent for a 13, 14-year-old to actually say to yourself, I'm not going to allow that belief system to be to recognize that it was actually their experience. And I think that's so common, like teachers at school who teach the creative. It's a terrible thing to say, but I'll often say to my kids, just remember that teacher, they're not actually doing that professionally. Yeah. They're just at school. I don't want to say they failed at that thing. I think more they gave up on that thing, because it's a very courageous life, isn't it? Like, sure, there might not be any guarantee of money, but actually even the poverty-stricken artist is just one version of it's not the truth. You don't have to be a poverty-stricken artist. You can actually be, I don't know, I always hear that story of, is it Leonardo da Vinci, and then maybe Raffaello or something? It's the two of them. One was really poor and a starving artist, and the other one was really rich and rich artist, and they both existed at the exact same time period. So it was much more about their belief system about themselves than it was really about who was a better artist. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really terrific story. So what actually would you then say to the young Ben? Would you say, like, stick to it, you're going to make it? Don't listen to the old guys.
Yeah, well, I think the one of the things that I haven't really been talking with my students so much about, but one thing that I would have liked to have, I'd like to be better at, and wish I'd spent time on as a young man, is dealing with humans. I think dealing with humans is the hardest bloody thing on the planet to do. As in my human experience and my existence, dealing with other people, that's really, really hard to do. And the people that do it well often become successful. They know how to manage, like, there's a lot of egos in the music industry. People know how to deal with that. People know how to, as a session musician, a lot of the way that I have to deal with, the way I choose to deal with band leaders is I have to kind of tell everyone, or I have to make everyone at least feel, without lying to them, make everyone feel like this is the most important thing that I'm doing today. Yeah. Like, I'm playing in like, I think there's 9 bands or something at the moment, as well as picking up sessions which are scratch bands. So I'm playing with lots of different ensembles, and sometimes there's an overlap in what I can do. Like, I get booked for the 2 gigs on the same day, for example. And that can be really upsetting for somebody that's gone to the trouble of booking the gig and promoting it and getting the band together and all that hundreds of unpaid hours that goes into just a single performance. For me to turn around and say, oh, sorry, I've got another gig, I have to figure out ways of making that okay and making people trust that I believe in their project and it's an important project. That's just an example of the sorts of skill sets you need to master, to progress and become successful in the music industry, dealing with people. It's a
wow,
big one.
what a perfect place to finish. Oh, well, it's opened up a whole can of worms.
Yeah.
but it's really fantastic advice. Like, I think, I've spoken to a fair few creatives on this podcast so far, and I'm sure it's come up in different ways, but you've just really highlighted it as, we're often talking about mastering the skills and mastering your own inner demons, but I don't think we've really talked about, having to be really good at dealing with other people. And you said there, making them feel that their project is the most important thing you're doing right now.
Yeah, it's a big one.
That's awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for you're such a busy person, and taking time out of your schedule to be on my tiny little podcast is very, very much appreciated. It's been an absolute joy to speak to you today. And in the show notes, listeners, you can find all the links to Ben if you want to book him for a gig or just see how a good drummer does it. Then, jump on and follow those links. Thanks again so much for being on the show, Ben.
Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review, because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out thechildren'sbookauthorpodcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Eleanor Page? Find me at eleanorpage.com or come and say hello on social at Eleanor Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.